Hi, my name is Grace Harlan, and I'm going to tell you about the story Holes. It's by Louis Sachar. Here's a picture of him right over here. I think Holes is a great book. It has a lot of suspense, and if you like books that have a lot of action, then Holes is definitely the book for you. This book had so much action and was written so well, it literally only took me 2 days to read. It was so exciting. Even though some things in this book couldn't happen, like curses and gypsies, this book is very relatable. In the beginning of the story, Stanley Yelnats gets arrested for stealing a pair of shoes that belonged to a famous sports player, and they cost a small fortune. Though Stanley was blamed for the crime, none of this mess was his fault at all. Stanley had a choice of how to get punished, jail or Camp Green Lake. Stanley chose camp. You might think that this would be like a very obvious decision, but in my mind, Camp Green Lake is much worse than a jail. The leader of the camp, the warden, wanted loot. Several years back, she had lots of treasure, but a woman buried it. In camp, the criminals had to dig a hole each day. The hole had to be 5 feet wide and 5 feet tall. The boys were told that there was no reason for digging holes, besides that they were criminals. But the real reason is that so hopefully one of the boys would find the money. "This is no Girl Scout camp," Mr. Sir, who worked at Camp Green Lake, would often say. On the way to camp, Stanley was thinking that this hard life was because of his no-good, dirty, rotten great-great-grandfather. Stanley's grandfather was to follow some instructions given to a gypsy named Zeroni, but he did not follow his instruction, and the Yelnats' legend is that the gypsy cursed his entire family. Later in the book, Stanley finds out that this family really is cursed. When Stanley arrives at Camp Green Lake, he meets some new friends. The children, treated like slaves, had really strange nicknames like Magnet, Zero, and Armpit. The next day, Stanley wakes up early and digs his first hole. After some time, Stanley finishes his hole after all of his other friends. The same process went on for several days, and these days turned into long, long weeks. At this point, you're probably thinking that I'm crazy to call this book suspenseful, but wait. One day, Stanley found some treasure. This treasure was a clue to the loot the warden was looking for. Unfortunately, Stanley had made a deal with his friend X-Ray. This deal was that if Stanley found any treasure in his hole, he had to give it up to X-Ray. Then X-Ray could report the treasure to the warden. X-Ray would then get the rest of the day off. Stanley reluctantly handed his treasure to X-Ray and X-Ray turned the treasure into the warden. Everyone now has to dig by X-Ray's hole and hope to find the treasure. It became obvious to the boys the warden was looking for something, even though she did not tell them this. Stanley knew that they were digging in the wrong spot. A few more days later, Zero had enough of digging holes. He ran away from the camp. Stanley and his friend assumed that Zero would come back, but after several days there was still no sign of him. Stanley decided he had to go after him, even though Zero was probably already dead. Stanley's fear wasn't of Zero being dead. It was that Zero was still alive, crawling on the hot, hot sand, and starving and dehydrated. After a long time of looking, Stanley finally finds Zero. He is still alive. Turns out Zero had been living on raw onions and some kind of liquid he found that he calls sploosh. Stanley and Zero must survive out by themselves, which is going to be hard with Stanley's curse in mind. There's only one way for the curse to be broken. Stanley must carry the great-great-grandson of the gypsy who cursed his grandfather, Zeroni, up a huge mountain. Will Stanley break the curse? Will he ever see his real home again? Or will Stanley and Zero end up turning around and head back to Camp Green Lake and die a slave digging holes at the dreaded camp? Read Holes and find out what happens to Stanley and his friends.